Somewhere between Junction 7 and the lower freight corridor, the station decided to fall apart. At least, that was how Rin Calloway described it in his maintenance log later. The alarm had been quiet. Not a blaring, red light emergency. Just a soft ping on his wrist unit that said, "Pressure irregularity, subdeck C, cargo hold 4." The kind of ping most engineers ignored for an hour. Rin went immediately, because he had learned a long time ago that the quiet problems were always worse. He squeezed through the access hatch with his toolkit on his back and a light fixed to his forehead, moving through the low passage that smelled like recycled air and old metal. Arden's Cradle was a good station, solid, dependable, but its lower decks had the personality of a machine that had been running too long without a break. Pipes groaned. Panels hummed at the wrong frequency. Things shifted in ways that were not quite wrong, but never quite right either. He found the pressure source at the back of Hold 4. It was not a pipe. The cargo container was cracked open along one seam. A transit pod, the kind used for live biological cargo, plated in a dull bronze casing with Dravery script running along the side. The pod had come loose from its rack, probably during the last micro-burn, and wedged itself diagonally against the wall. The crack in the casing was wide enough for Rin to fit his arm through. Something inside the crack was breathing. He moved closer, slowly, and pointed his headlight at the gap. A pair of eyes looked back at him, large, amber, burning the way a lit coal burns just before it goes fully bright. The creature behind those eyes was small. Small enough that Rin's first thought, absurdly, was that someone had lost a very unusual dog. It was a Dravery hatchling. Rin had seen adult Dravery on the station, 4 of them, all stationed in the upper research decks. They were tall. They moved like weather. Their scales caught light in ways that made you feel like you were missing something when you looked at them directly. This one was nothing like that yet. This one was the size of a large retriever, with scales that kept flickering from gold to a deep, bruised violet, cycling fast, which, Rin would learn later, meant distress. Its wings were folded so tight against its body that they had disappeared into its sides. One foreleg was twisted in a loop of power cable, holding it in place. It made a sound, low, vibrating, more felt in the chest than heard with the ears. Not a growl. Something smaller than a growl. Rin set his toolkit down. "Okay," he said, in the same voice he used when a conduit coupling had jammed and he needed to think. "Okay, you're stuck. I see it." He opened a channel on his wrist unit and sent a brief message up to the Dravery quarters. "Hatchling found in cargo hold 4. Appears uninjured. Sending location." The automated response told him the nearest Dravery crew member was 19 minutes away. Station protocol said he should secure the area and wait. He looked at the hatchling. The hatchling looked at him. Its scales pulsed violet again, deep, fast, frightened. Rin was not very good at waiting when something was frightened. He approached carefully, keeping low, making himself small. He narrated as he went, not because he thought the hatchling understood standard, but because silence felt unkind. "I'm going to get that cable off your leg. I'm not going to touch you anywhere else. I'm just going to sort the cable. It's wound around twice. I can see it from here. It's not going to be a big deal." The hatchling watched him. It didn't pull away. He worked the cable loose in about 4 minutes. When the last loop came free, the hatchling drew its leg back and held it to its chest, testing it. Nothing broken. It stayed where it was, pressed against the back of the cracked pod, watching Rin with those coal-bright eyes. Rin sat back on his heels. The scales were still cycling, gold to violet, violet to gold, but slower now. Calmer. The violet was deep and rich, like the sky at the exact moment the sun finished setting. The gold beneath it was warm, almost soft. "You look like dusk," Rin said, without thinking. "The way the sky looks right at the end of the day. Gold going purple. You look exactly like that." He tilted his head. "Dusk," he said, as though testing whether it fit. "Yeah, that's what you look like." The hatchling went still. Not the stillness of fear. Something else. Something Rin had no word for. A stillness that felt like a door opening, or a lock turning, or a sound finding the exact shape of the space it had been made for. Its scales stopped cycling. They settled into a pattern he had not seen before. Gold threaded through with violet. The two colors woven together as if they had always been meant to sit side by side. It looked at Rin. And then it took one small step toward him. Rin didn't move. He just held still and let it come. The access hatch above them opened. He heard footsteps, multiple, heavy, the particular weight of Dravery moving at speed. Velsorin came through first, the old elder whose scales were deep bronze and whose presence always made the air feel slightly more formal. He stopped when he saw the hatchling. 3 other Dravery crowded in behind him. They all stopped. The hold went completely, absolutely silent. Not the silence of a room with nothing happening, but the silence of many large beings choosing, all at once, not to make a single sound. Rin looked up at them. Their eyes were fixed on the hatchling. Their expressions were unreadable. "I freed its leg," Rin said. "The pod cracked open during the burn, I think. It's not hurt." Nobody answered him. Velsorin was staring at the hatchling's scales, at the gold woven through with violet, settled, steady, still. His mouth opened, closed. Then he looked at Rin, really looked at him, in a way that made Rin feel like he was something that did not belong in the equation he was standing in the middle of. "What?" Velsorin said, very quietly. "Did you say to it?" Velsorin had lived for 941 years. In that time, he had watched 3 stars collapse. He had sat in silence for 80 years during a period of Dravery mourning after a great elder died. He had crossed the void between 2 systems on a vessel no bigger than a transport shuttle, navigating by resonance alone. He had, at one point, been wrong about something, just once, and had spent a decade correcting it. He had never, in 941 years, been unprepared for something. He was unprepared for this. The hatchling's scales held steady, that particular weaving of gold and deep violet that Velsorin recognized the way one recognizes gravity, not with the mind, but with something older than the mind. His own scales, bronze and ancient, had gone flat against his body without him deciding to make them do so. That was not something he controlled. That was something that happened when a Dravery was in the presence of a true name. He had been in that presence twice before in 9 centuries. Both times, the name had been spoken by a senior Dravery elder, deep in ritual, after years of listening. The human sitting on the cargo hold floor in a maintenance jumpsuit was looking up at him with a grease smudge on his chin and the expression of someone who had no idea what they had done. Velsorin breathed in slowly. He needed a moment. He was going to take it. Among the Dravery, a name was not a label. This was the part that no outsider had ever truly understood, not in 4,000 years of interspecies contact. Names were not invented. They were discovered, or rather, they were heard. Every living Dravery had a frequency, a vibration. It was present from the moment of hatching, unique as a signature, woven into the pattern of the soul fire that ran beneath the scales. The process of finding it, what outsiders called the rite of resonance, could take years, sometimes decades. An elder would listen, in deep meditative silence, to the essence of a young dragon, filtering out noise and distraction until that frequency became clear. Then, and only then, would the name be spoken aloud. When it was spoken correctly, it resonated. Not metaphorically. The hatchling scales would settle into a pattern that no other pattern could produce, gold threaded with its deepest secondary color, stable, like a signal finally finding its receiver. The human had looked at the hatchling for perhaps 3 seconds. He had said one word, and the scales had settled. Velsorin turned to the other 3 Dravery behind him. They were all looking at the same thing. None of them spoke. Orith, the youngest of the 4 adults aboard the station, had her neck rigid, scales locked flat, eyes wide. Pevin and Dassa stood so still they could have been carved from stone. None of them had names for what they were seeing either. Velsorin looked back at the human and made himself ask the question calmly. "What did you say to it?" The human, Rin, his name was. Velsorin had read the crew manifest, frowned. He clearly thought he was about to be in trouble. "I just talked to it while I was freeing the leg. Narrated what I was doing. Kept it calm." He paused. "And then I said it looked like dusk. The way the sky looks when the sun finishes setting, gold going into purple. And I called it dusk. It was just a name. I wasn't trying to." Velsorin put one hand up. The human stopped. The elder turned away and touched the communicator at his collar, opening a channel to the Dravery conclave network, the tight beam signal reserved for events of the highest significance. He had used it 4 times in his life. He used it now. He said 3 things, quietly and clearly. the hatchling's status, the word that had been spoken, and the name of the species that had spoken it. Then he closed the channel and waited. The response came in 40 seconds. All 4 Dravery aboard felt it at the same time, a ripple through the conclave frequency, like a stone dropped into still water. It was not words. It was the sound of an entire distributed network going silent. Every Dravery who had been on that channel, 47 individuals across 6 vessels and 2 stations, had stopped speaking simultaneously. The silence lasted 11 seconds. Then voices began to come back, one by one, overlapping, urgent, questioning. Vel Soren closed the channel again. He could hear, distantly, the Solini diplomat Avine appearing in the corridor outside the hold, drawn by the commotion. He could hear the Gravac officer Barrack arriving a few steps behind. Both of them stopped when they saw the Dravery standing in rigid, total silence around the human and the hatchling. "Is this a cultural incident?" Avine asked, very quietly, to no one in particular. Her antennae were folded back. Barrack said nothing. He was watching Vel Soren's face with the careful attention of someone measuring a situation by its most dangerous element. The hatchling, Dusk, it was called now, it was called that now, there was no walking it back, had moved forward another step while Vel Soren had his back turned. It was very close to the human now, not quite touching. Vel Soren approached Rin slowly. He stopped 2 paces away and folded his hands in front of him, a gesture of formal address. The human looked up at him, still with that expression of someone who has broken a rule they didn't know existed and is waiting for the size of it to be explained. Vel Soren said, "You are not in trouble." Rin let out a breath. "However," Vel Soren continued, "I need you to understand something. In the history of my people, going back 4,000 years of recorded tradition, no being outside of our species has ever done what you just did." Rin looked at the hatchling, then back at Vel Soren. "I just said it looked like dusk." "Yes," said Vel Soren. He did not add anything to that. There was nothing to add that would make it smaller. Behind him, he heard Avine whisper to Barrack, "This is a cultural incident." For hours after the cargo hold, Rin was sitting in the station's formal meeting room, the one with the high ceiling and the long, oval table that nobody ever used, because formal meetings on Arden's Cradle usually happened in the cafeteria over cooling mugs of something. He had changed out of his maintenance jumpsuit. He had washed the grease off his chin. He had been told, by a very tense message from Admiral Harrow's office, to present himself here at the 19th hour and to be, quote, calm and cooperative. He intended to be both those things. He was also, quietly, terrified. The room held 7 people, all 4 Dravery. The Solini diplomat Avine, who was sitting so straight her joints looked locked. Barrack, the Gravac officer, who had wedged himself into a chair designed for someone half his width. And Rin. Vel Soren stood at the head of the table in a way that made Rin think of judges. The elder's scales had returned to their normal bronze. His face was unreadable. "This is not a disciplinary proceeding," Vel Soren said, to open. Rin almost said it feels like one, but stopped himself. "Okay. We have questions. We ask that you answer them honestly and without filtering your answers for what you believe we want to hear. Honesty, in this matter, is more important than diplomacy." Rin nodded. That, at least, he could do. The questions began. They were not the questions he expected. He had been ready for, "Do you understand what you did? Do you understand the sacred nature of Dravery naming rituals? Do you understand that you violated several centuries of tradition?" He had prepared answers for all of those. He had even prepared an apology. A good one. He had thought about it in the corridor on the way here. Vel Soren asked, "When you looked at the hatchling, what did you notice first?" Rin blinked. Its eyes. They were very bright, like something with a heat source behind them. And after that, the scales, the way they were flickering between 2 colors. I thought it looked distressed. The flickering seemed fast, like a nervous response. Orith, the youngest Dravery, leaned forward. Her voice was lower than Vel Soren's and slightly rougher, like gravel in motion. "Had you ever seen a Dravery hatchling before?" "No. I've seen images in the cultural briefings, but not in person." "Yet you identified the color flicker as distress." "It seemed obvious." He paused. "Was it not obvious?" Orith exchanged a look with Vel Soren that Rin could not interpret. Heaven, the 3rd elder, spoke. His standard was slow and precise, like each word was being placed down carefully. When you spoke the name, the word dusk, what did you feel? In the moment before you said it? Rin thought about this. He was trying to be accurate, not just quick. I was looking at the hatchling. The scales had calmed a little. They were still cycling, but slower. And the colors were. I kept seeing the shape of a particular moment. The end of a day, when the gold light is fading into the purple of the sky, and both are still there at once, and it's the most itself it will ever look. That moment felt like what I was looking at. He shrugged. So I said it. The room was quiet for a moment. Aveen, who had been taking very careful notes on her datapad, stopped writing. Barrick had his arms crossed. He was looking at Rin with an expression that might have been respect or might have been confusion. With Gravak, those often looked the same. Vel Soren said, quietly, "Is it a common human behavior to name things in this manner?" "Yes," said Rin. "Very. We name pets, ships, equipment, weather systems, landmarks. On my previous posting, I named all the conduit junctions on Deck 9. I called them things like elbows, and the long one near the reactor room I called string bean." Aveen made a sound. A very small, involuntary sound. Vel Soren did not smile. Or if he did, it moved through his face in a way Rin wasn't equipped to read. "And why do you do this?" Rin considered. "It's easier to care about something if it has a name. If it has a name, it's a thing. It exists in a way that matters." Another silence. Longer this time. Vel Soren looked at the other Dravery. Something passed between them. Not a look, exactly, more like a shift in the air of the room. Then a warm weight settled across Rin's feet. He looked down. Dusk had slipped under the table at some point without anyone noticing, small enough, still, to move quietly, and was now curled across both his feet like a particularly confident blanket. Its scales were steady, gold woven through with violet. Rin looked up. Every Dravery in the room was watching the hatchling. "Is that a problem?" Rin asked carefully. Vel Soren exhaled. It was the largest exhale Rin had ever seen from a Dravery, slow and long, like a pressure being released from a place that had been holding it a long time. Then, from deep in the elder's chest, a sound. Rich, low, rolling. Real laughter. Genuine and large, and completely unexpected. The other Dravery shifted. Some of their scales relaxed. Aveen pressed her hands together over her datapad and looked at the ceiling. Rin waited for someone to explain what had just happened. No explanation came. "May I ask," Rin said carefully, "what that means?" "The hatchling sitting on my feet." Vel Soren composed himself, mostly. "In our tradition, when a hatchling accepts its name, it seeks the source of the name, where it feels most real." He looked at Rin steadily. "It has chosen you." "Right," said Rin. He looked down at Dusk. Dusk blinked up at him, slow, amber, certain. "Right," Rin said again, quietly, to himself. He had the distinct feeling that his life had just changed shape. He wasn't sure yet if that was good or bad. Dusk put its chin down on his left foot and closed its eyes. Probably good, Rin thought. Probably. Admiral Harrow had a list on her desk. She made lists when things stopped making sense. It was a habit from her years as a junior navigation officer, when the best response to confusion was to write down everything you knew and look at it until patterns appeared. The list currently on her desk had 3 columns. What happened, what it means, what to do about it. The first column was clear. The second column had a question mark. The third column had the word unclear written in large letters and underlined twice. Her door opened. Lieutenant Farrow stepped in, looking like a person who had just run up 3 decks of stairs. "Admiral." Conclave response just came through. "Give it to me." 3 conclave speakers are departing their current position and will arrive at Arden's cradle in approximately 62 hours. They've formally requested what they call a response gathering. My translator flags that term as a significant ritual designation. I looked it up, and the closest record I could find was from 200 years ago, during a Dravery territorial dispute with the Solini. He paused. It resolved peacefully. Eventually. Harrow looked at the list. She added conclave speakers en route to the first column. Under what it means, she wrote, "Serious," and put a box around it. "Has Vel Soren been informed?" "He already knew, Admiral. He sent the request." She nodded. "Give me the station's cultural liaison briefings on Dravery naming protocols." "Full archive." Farrow hesitated. "I already pulled them." She looked up. "There's nothing in there," he said, "about this." There's a section titled Dravery Naming Protocols, Interspecies Considerations. It's 4 sentences long. The last sentence reads, "No interspecies involvement in Dravery naming ritual has been recorded. This section will be updated if relevant events occur." Harrow closed her eyes briefly. Then she opened them and asked for a meeting with Rin Calloway at the earliest available time, which turned out to be 20 minutes later because Rin had apparently been sitting in the corridor outside her office for the past hour with a baby dragon on his lap. She opened the door herself. Rin stood up immediately. Dusk, disturbed by the movement, opened both eyes, assessed the situation, and went back to sleep draped across Rin's forearm. "Come in," Harrow said. Rin sat across from her desk. He was holding the hatchling the way a person holds something they've been carrying long enough that they've stopped noticing it. Naturally, without thinking, the hatchling fit against his arm like it had been designed for that specific purpose. Harrow studied him. He was an ordinary-looking person. Medium height, slightly tired eyes from too much time in low-light maintenance spaces, calluses on both hands. He had been with the station for 3 years. His record was clean, competent, and thoroughly unremarkable up until yesterday. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "Honestly, I'm not sure what I'm holding up from." He looked at Dusk. "Everyone keeps telling me I did something significant, but no one has explained the full shape of it. I feel like I've walked into a building through the wrong door, and I can't find the right one." She liked his honesty. "I'll try to explain what I know." She folded her hands. The Dravery have a naming tradition that is the core of their spiritual belief. A name is not symbolic for them. It is literal. A true name matches the fundamental pattern of a Dravery's soul. Finding it takes years of ritual and meditative practice by a trained elder. In their entire recorded history, for 1,000 years of it, no being from outside their species has ever spoken a true name correctly. She paused. "Until you called a hatchling Dusk." Rin was quiet for a moment. "And I did it right. According to Vel Soren and every Dravery on this station, yes. Completely and exactly right." The hatchling responded in a way that, by their tradition, confirms it beyond any doubt. He exhaled slowly through his nose. "I just said what it looked like." "I know." Harrow leaned back. "That's the part that matters most, I think. Tell me, why do you name things?" "In general. I've read that you named equipment on your last posting." "The junction connectors." "Yeah." He thought for a second. "It's easier to take care of something if it has a name. Things with names feel real. They stop being just an object you're maintaining and start being a thing that matters. If something breaks and it doesn't have a name, it's just a broken piece of equipment. If it has a name, it's something you're responsible for." He looked at Dusk. "I called the hatchling Dusk because that was what I saw when I looked at it. It felt true, so I said it." Harrow was quiet for a moment. She looked down at her list. Under what it means, she crossed out the question mark and wrote something new. Then she underlined it. The sentence read, "Humans make things real by naming them." She thought about the 8 billion people on Earth and the colonies. People who named their cars and their boats and their houseplants. People who named storms and mountains and the individual trees in their backyards. People who looked at a stranger's baby and immediately invented a nickname. People who named their tools, their computers, their childhood stuffed animals, and expected that to mean something. It did mean something. She just hadn't known, until now, that the rest of the galaxy was watching. "The conclave speakers arrive in 62 hours, she said. "You'll need to meet with them." Rin looked alarmed. "I'm an engineer." "I know." She almost smiled. "You might want to get some sleep." He stood to leave. Dusk adjusted itself without waking, settling more firmly across his arm, its scales flickering once, gold threaded through violet, and then going still. Harrow watched the door close behind them. Then she looked at her list a final time. In the third column, what to do about it? She crossed out unclear and wrote, simply, "Let Rin be Rin." She thought that was probably right. The 3 conclave speakers did not look like anything Rin had expected. He had imagined something ceremonial. Robes? Maybe, though he knew Dravery didn't wear clothes in the human sense. Formality, at least, some outward signal of rank. What arrived through the docking hatch were 3 Dravery who looked the way mountains looked. Old in a way that went deeper than age, worn smooth and enormous and steady in a manner that suggested they had simply outlasted the things that once surprised them. The largest of the 3 was called Seraph. Rin learned this later. In the moment, He didn't know any of their names. He didn't ask. He had the sense that asking would be like walking up to a geological formation and introducing yourself. They had not gone to Admiral Harrow's office. They had not toured the station or asked for a briefing. They had come directly to find him. He had been in sub-deck C fixing a pressure seal, the same deck where the hatchling had been found, when Velsoren appeared at the hatch and said, simply, "They are here. Please come." Rin came. They met in the wide observation bay, the room with the curved wall of transparent alloy that looked out over the gas giant below. Arden's Cradle's best room. Harrow had clearly chosen it deliberately. The planet beneath them was a slow spiral of ochre and cream, enormous and indifferent, the kind of view that made a person feel very small and very lucky at the same time. Dusk was on Rin's shoulder. He had tried to leave it in his quarters. It had made its opinions on that plan extremely clear. He had given up. The three speakers looked at him for a long time without speaking. Rin stood still and let them. He had been told by Velsoren, gently but firmly, that this part was important, that the speakers were reading something, though Velsoren hadn't been precise about what. Rin focused on breathing evenly. Sareth said, in a voice that seemed to arrive from several places at once, "Name 3 things in this room." Rin looked around. "That panel is the atmospheric monitor. I call it watchful because it never stops running checks. The crack in the left frame of the window has been there since the micro burned 2 months ago. I've been calling it the reminder because I keep forgetting to file the repair order. And the gas giant." He paused, looking at it. "I've been calling it Old Gold in my head since I got here. It just looked like something that deserved a name." Silence. The three speakers consulted among themselves in Dravery. Low vibrations, more texture than language, the kind of communication that seemed to travel through the floor rather than the air. It lasted several minutes. Rin waited. Dusk was very still on his shoulder, scales flat and settled, as if it too was holding its breath. Then Sareth turned back to Rin. "In Dravery, there is a concept," the speaker said. "It has no clean translation into standard. The closest rendering is Orivel. It means, approximately, the unnamed gift. The capacity to perceive what something truly is before it has been declared. Not by training, not by ritual, by nature." A pause. "It is considered, in our tradition, a form of grace," Rin said carefully. "And you think I have that?" "We do not think," Sareth said. "We have observed. 3 times in this room. You named things as they are, not as you wished them to be. That is the definition of Orivel." The speaker looked at Dusk. The hatchling knew it first. Hatchlings, before the rite, are sensitive to Orivel in the way that young creatures often perceive truths that adults have learned to filter out. Rin looked at Dusk. Dusk looked at him, calm, amber, certain. "So what happens now?" Rin asked. Sareth spoke a Dravery phrase. Velsoren, standing to the side, translated in a low voice. "The conclave formally recognizes the naming of the hatchling known as Dusk as valid, complete, and binding under the full body of Dravery's spiritual law. The name is not preliminary. It is permanent." Rin breathed out slowly. That was good. That was the right answer. Then Sareth continued, and Velsoren translated again, "Furthermore, the conclave formally extends to the human Rin Calloway the designation Ori Navavel, speaker of unasked truth. This recognition has been granted to 5 individuals in 4,000 years of Dravery history. You are the 6th, the first of any species other than Dravery." Rin stood very still. "I'm a conduit engineer," he said. "Yes," said Sareth. "That is consistent." The formal proceedings ended after that. The speakers withdrew to their quarters. Harrow, who had been standing at the far side of the room observing, caught Rin's eye and gave him a small, satisfied nod. Avine the Solini diplomat was writing very fast on her datapad. Barrick the Gravac had not moved or spoken the entire time and was looking at Rin in a way that Rin could not fully interpret. Velsoren stayed behind when the others filed out. He stood beside Rin at the observation window, both of them looking at Old Gold turning slowly below. "The conclave is shaken," the elder said after a while. "Not only by what you did, by what it implies." Rin looked at him. "What do you mean?" Velsoren was quiet for a moment. "If one human, untrained, unintentional, unprepared, can perceive a true name as easily as you described, we find ourselves asking what your species is at its core." He turned to look at Rin directly. Your people name everything. Every creature, every object, every place you encounter. You have always done this. We assumed it was habit. A social convenience. It's not, Rin said. No, said Velsoren. It is not. We understand that now. He was quiet a moment more. You name things because you see them. Truly see them. That is not a small thing, Rin Calloway. That may be the largest thing we have learned about your species in 60 years of contact. Rin looked down at Dusk, settled warm and golden violet on his shoulder. He thought about 8 billion humans, naming their cars and their cats and their kitchen appliances, and had no idea how to explain that to a 900-year-old dragon. So he said nothing. He just looked at Old Gold and let the thought sit. It fit, somehow. That felt right. 6 months later, nothing had changed, and everything had changed, and Rin had not entirely decided which of those was more true. He was still an engineer. He had asked, very politely, to remain an engineer. Harrow had looked at him for a long moment, then nodded as if she had expected that. He had turned down a diplomatic posting, 3 academic interview requests, and 1 offer from a Selene cultural university that had used the phrase unprecedented xenological subject in its first sentence. He had declined all of them by message, with a short note that said he appreciated the interest and needed to get back to work. He was currently on Deck 9. The conduit junction he called String Bean had developed a vibration issue in the overnight cycle, and nobody else had filed a report on it yet. Dusk was wrapped around his neck. In 6 months, Dusk had grown from retriever size to something closer to a large wolf, and had developed a habit of riding on Rin's shoulders and back like a living scarf. One that occasionally breathed smoke and seemed to have opinions about the quality of his diagnostic work. When Rin made a mistake in his sequencing, Dusk would rest its chin on his head and huff. When he got it right, the scales would go bright gold for a moment. It was, Rin had decided, an excellent quality control system. He was deep in the junction casing, head and both arms inside the access panel, when he heard footsteps. They were Velsoren's footsteps. He recognized them now, that particular measured weight. The Elder had taken to visiting Deck 9 twice a week for what he called informal inquiry, and what Rin had come to think of as lunch, but in a maintenance corridor. String Bean again? The Elder asked. String Bean again, Rin confirmed. Velsoren settled against the opposite wall in the way only very large beings who have mastered their own bodies can settle. Completely still, completely comfortable, completely at ease in a corridor that was not designed for someone his size. He had brought food, Dravery travel provisions, which tasted nothing like anything Rin had grown up eating, but which he had developed a liking for over 6 months. They ate. Rin worked intermittently. Dusk stayed on his shoulders and supervised. This was how things were now. The paper has been translated into the Gravac Academic Registry, Velsoren said, eventually. Which paper? Scholar Peven's paper. Orivel and the Human Condition. It is now available in 17 languages. It has been cited in 2 Dravery Temple readings this cycle. The Selene Council has apparently discussed it in 3 separate sessions. The Elder looked at Rin the way he often did, with an expression that contained many things. It is changing things. Slowly. Rin tightened a coupling. I haven't read it. I know. Velsoren almost smiled. Peven found that charming. He mentioned it in the paper. Something clattered in the junction, a small piece of housing that had been loose, and Rin caught it before it hit the floor. He held it for a second, weighing it in his hand. It was worn smooth where many hands had handled it over years. I should name this thing, he said, without thinking. Dusk made a soft sound against the back of his neck, something between a rumble and a note. Its way of expressing that it agreed. That was when Barrick appeared. The Gravac officer came down the corridor in his careful, deliberate way, shoulders first, checking clearance out of old habit. He was large, stone-skinned, with a quiet that was not shyness but something more like economy. He had never come to find Rin before. Not once in 6 months. He stopped a respectful distance away. Velsoren watched and said nothing. Barrick was holding a datapad. He turned it so Rin could see the display. A vessel profile, an older model, wide-bodied, the kind of ship that had been in service so long it had started to look like it had opinions. The hull had been repainted twice, and the NAV array was an afterthought addition from a different manufacturer. It was not a beautiful ship. Rin looked at it for 3 seconds. I've had it for 22 years, Barrick said. His voice was steady, but there was something careful in it. The tone of a person who has chosen every word in advance. It has never had a name. I never found one that fit. He looked at Rin directly. I want to ask if you would. Rin looked at the ship's profile on the datapad. He looked at the double repainted hull, the retrofitted array, the blunt and practical shape of it. A ship that had been everywhere and said nothing about it. A ship that carried its years without making a show of them. A ship that just kept going. Steadfast, Rin said. 3 seconds. He hadn't planned it. It just arrived, the way they always did. Barrick did not react immediately. He looked at the datapad. Something moved through his jaw, a tightening, a controlled thing. His eyes, which were dark and always flat, went slightly bright for a moment and then went controlled again. He nodded once, a single, precise dip of his head. He turned and walked back down the corridor without another word. Velsorin watched him go. Then he looked at Rin. You did it again, the elder said. Rin put the loose housing piece into his pocket. I just said what it looked like. Velsorin was quiet for a long moment. The kind of silence that meant something was being said in place, the way a stone is placed at the end of a wall, not dramatically, not with ceremony, but with the full weight of intention. Yes, the elder said. That is exactly what you did. Rin went back to string being. Dusk put its chin on his head and breathed out warm air that smelled like something between metal and rain. Outside the viewport at the end of the deck, Old Gold was still turning. Enormous, patient, wearing the name Rin had given it the way the gas giant wore its own storms. Naturally, without effort. Somewhere across the station, in the upper research decks, a Dravery scholar was receiving a message from 17 different academic bodies asking questions he had not finished answering yet. In 6 Dravery temples across the sector, readers were encountering the phrase Orivel in the same paragraph as the word human for the first time. The Solini Council was arguing about what it meant for interspecies spiritual law. The Gravac Academic Registry had flagged the paper for urgent distribution. None of this reached Rin. He was fixing string being. He was not the first human to name something. He would not be the last. 8 billion people were doing it right now. On ships and stations and colonies and the old blue world at the center of it all. Naming cars and pets and rivers and stars. Not because they were told to. Not because they knew the word Orivel. But because they looked at things and saw what they truly were and felt, without knowing why, that the right thing to do was to say it out loud. They had always done this. They would always do this. The galaxy, it turned out, had been listening all along. It was just now beginning to understand what it heard.